Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graben. Our guest today is Andy Freed. He is the CEO of Virtual Inc., a strategic consulting and professional services firm. And he is author of the new book available now. I got a pre publication copy here. It is Lead Like the Boss, the Bruce Springsteen framework to elevating your leadership. So it's not lead like a boss, the boss, Bruce Springsteen. So Andy, before writing the book, he spent more than 30 years helping leaders communicate with clarity and intention with clients ranging from Microsoft and Google and other tech companies to associations and nonprofits. His company has been named a best place to work for more than a decade. So Andy, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
Best workplace for a long time. That's a great honor, and I'm sure that
That's something we're
is
very proud of and something we certainly aspire to.
yeah. And I will aspire to being a clear communicator here today. You probably won't have any trouble with that as we get into the book and leadership topics. But first off, of course, Andy, we're going to start with the main question, like we always do. What's your favorite mistake?
So I'll give the big picture on it is anytime that you don't consider your audience when you're communicating,
Mm,
you leave yourself with a chance to make some good mistakes. So
mm,
my favorite story on that comes from 2006. We were helping launch a global organization that was going to help with payment card security, and it's gone on to become the PCI Security Standards Council. And we had the idea that we were trying to get members to this organization from all over the world. Their general manager had a white beard and kind of a good, kind of as a distinctive looking guy. So we had the idea of, from our marketing team, of let's, to get members, let's get a picture of him pointing out in the picture that says, "We want you to be a member of this organization."
yeah, an
And we
Uncle Sam thing.
Uncle Sam, this is awesome. We were then reminded by JCB, which is basically American Express of Japan, that as it turns out, World War II propaganda
Oh,
as popular in Tokyo as one might think. American, you're kind of harkening back to nostalgia of American World War II propaganda isn't really what the audience was looking for in Japan. So it's
yeah.
yet another example of if you don't worry about your audience, you can find yourself backtracking pretty fast. And if you don't think about your audience from all different angles, and I was looking at that with just an American lens and
Mhm.
totally missed the boat. So I loved getting that call of, we think about World War II a little different than you guys just.
Yeah. Well, at what point did that mistake get caught? Was it still during kind of the brainstorming and ideation
It was fairly
phase?
far along at that point.
Oh, yeah,
So there was a pretty good, 90-degree turn that we needed to make at that point. So
yeah.
that's the way these things can go.
Feedback better late than never.
Feedback better late than never. And, now it's one of those things that I've come to remember of just thinking about everything with that global lens and thinking about that through the eyes of my audience, because that's what matters. Even though I thought it was clever, more audience might not have shared that belief.
Yeah. So I imagine so that sounds like one category of not understanding or not considering your audience would be international or cross-cultural elements.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you've done a lot of work internationally. Like, I mean, what was part of your learning from that mistake? Like to put in some earlier checks or make sure there were people
Yeah,
with their
they're
eyes.
thinking about everything from that global lens if it's going to go that way, and understanding that there are even words that don't translate from English to English well.
Mhm.
Our English is different.
Yeah.
So just understanding that everything's going to get perceived by somebody from their own lens, and that lens is going to be very different depending on where they're sitting.
Yeah. Was there any like what was the aftermath of that being pointed out? I mean,
And
obviously
it
there
was
was some
understanding. I mean, it was really just the sense of, and hey, we're happy to screen things for you and happy to provide that eye for you. And
yeah.
and just more realization on our part. And again, it's one of those things for me, that's now in my bag of tricks when I work with with our team of, okay, let's take a look at this. And let's even doing things now like, we're careful to, if we come up with a name for an organization, have a domain, let's
Yeah.
search a domain name in every language to make sure that We haven't picked the French word for something that we wouldn't want to pick.
Does that
Well,
happen sometimes
it happens all the time. And, it's just a question of being aware of it and thinking about your audience.
Yeah. And these stories are funny if you weren't involved in them.
Yeah, that's always the way. It's funny until you have 500 of those flyers sitting on your desk.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so what are some of the I'd just be curious, like what are some of the other categories of mistakes, of not considering your audience? Like I think of like a speaker in a field like mine. I have to be aware, am I speaking to an audience with, a similar kind of technical and jargon background of mine, or am I speaking to a general public audience and try to keep that in mind?
I think people make these mistakes more and more these days because the
Yeah.
problem is communication's gotten too easy. If I
Mm,
want to do a presentation, like people think, well, I'm just going to open PowerPoint and start cranking out slides because I can. And now with AI, it makes it even easier to do that. Now, if I want to communicate with somebody who is in Japan, I can just click a button on Teams and there they are on my screen. There's no 12-hour flight to get there and forethought. So I think people are making these mistakes more
mm,
because communication has gotten ostensibly easier. So people just start in the middle. I need to communicate. I'm just going to start. I'm cranking out slides. Here we go. And they haven't thought about what people need to hear and thought
mm.
about what the audience is and ultimately what they want that audience to think, feel, and do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge difference between what I want to say and what my audience needs to hear. Right.
Absolutely. And there are times, and if you don't address what they need to hear, they're not going to hear you at all.
Mm,
If they're coming to a meeting with from a place of fear and you haven't addressed that fear, they're not going to hear you at all.
mhm. What can you think of an example of trying to address that upfront from your work? That
Mm,
fear or emotion?
There are plenty, but I'll take a pedestrian example that I use in the book, which is just something as simple as like we're changing health insurance as a company.
Yeah.
It's really easy to get up and have HR crank out a bunch of slides that says new plan XYZ, old plan XYZ, and here's how you sign up.
Yeah.
But if at some point in that you would acknowledge that everyone in the room is thinking about, well, is this going to cost me more? And can
Mhm.
I keep my doctor? And have they worried about that? You're losing the audience. So if you don't think about that right from the get-go and think about how they feel and the people's personal worries about it, they're not going to hear you on the facts. They're never getting to your lovely AI generated matrix that compares the two plans.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like there's a mistake of assuming that people only care about the logic of a situation. Like logically, rationally, these plans are better, but as humans, I mean, we're complicated.
That's why. So in the book, one of the things I talk about is think, feel, and do. And what you just talked about is that rational side, the think. And so many people forget about the feel. You think about what your audience feels too.
Yeah.
And how do you want them to feel? Do I want them to feel that I have explored every option on healthcare and that day I'm on your plan too? And this matters to me because I worry about my family. And that's why I want to make sure this was so good. How do I want them to feel? Do I want them to feel safe? Do I want them to feel threatened? What are the things I want them to feel coming out of this? That's something people forget. And that last step of do is all about, well, what do I actually want them to do at the end of this? Making that explicit for folks as well.
Yeah.
So often somebody comes up and they just address one of those three things and they miss the boat on being able to really communicate.
And addressing only two of the three is
Not
also
enough.
not
It's
enough.
just not enough. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
three-legged stool for a reason.
Yeah. Think, feel, and do. Let's talk more about the book. Again, it's Lead Like the Boss, the Bruce Springsteen framework to elevating your leadership. I just, first off, I mean, how did the book come to be and why a book focusing on Bruce
So
Springsteen?
I am one of these people who is this close to just selling everything I own and following Bruce and the E Street Band around the country.
Yeah.
I would happily do that if I could. I've seen Bruce 95 times live.
Wow.
And I'm looking forward to the 96th time on this coming tour. But somewhere along the way, I started learning something and started watching how he was interacting with the band, watching how he was interacting with the audience, and decided years ago, in part probably just to justify my trip to a concert in Phoenix,
Yeah.
I did a LinkedIn post about what I had learned from the show and heard from a lot of folks that it resonated with them. So eventually chose to turn that into the book.
Yeah.
because I think there's a lot of lessons you can take away and that every leader can take away, whether you're musical or not, whether you like Bruce or not. There's a
Yeah.
lot you can take away from how he stayed on top for 51 years.
Yeah. So is the cover photo a photo you took by chance at a show?
That one is not. There are a couple
Oh,
other photos that are photos from shows that I took that are in there, though.
yeah.
I've got a phone full of them.
Yeah. Now, was there any issue of like having to reach out to Bruce or his representatives about using name and
Yeah,
image?
we talked to his representatives, and they couldn't have been more cooperative and couldn't have
Oh,
been
great.
better about everything. So everything that you would hope.
And I'm glad that didn't lead to a mistake story of wanting to write
Exactly.
a
Exactly.
or
All of
being
a sudden,
told
this becomes lead like the Doobie Brothers. Would have been very different.
why, but why is that? I'm sorry. Well, I mean, I know who the Doobie Brothers are, but
No, it just would have
I,
been different if I lost the rubric of
oh,
the show that I know so well.
okay. You're just another band that
Yeah,
apparently
absolutely.
you're a big fan of. Yeah. So what are what are some of the core leadership behaviors that we can emulate that are observable if one of us goes to a show or got to see him and the band hanging out backstage or something?
So I'll take a couple. I'll take one from the beginning of the show and one from the end. So from the beginning of the show, Bruce shows don't start when he steps on stage. A Bruce show starts when he's sitting backstage 3 hours before the show, and he takes out a simple pen and a simple blank sheet of paper, and he starts writing out the set list for the show. And that set list is really his version of the think, feel, do exercise. It's what do I want people to think, feel, and do during this. And I know, for example, that Bruce loves to open his shows big,
Mhm.
because he has anxiety and depression. And he
Mhm.
has said that if he opens the show and the first 5 minutes has everybody in the audience feel like they've gotten their money's worth, then he can relax.
Yeah.
So he likes to open big. Then there might be a moment that he wants to quiet the audience down so he can tell a story. So what's that like? And then there's a moment after the story where he needs to have people back up. What's that like?
Yeah.
All of that is carefully scripted in his think, feel, do, which is the set list. Contrast that to so many people when confronted with, I need to present to our staff an update next month at a staff meeting. And the first thing they do is they go to the PowerPoint, they open last month's update, change the title to this month, and start cranking out slides. They've never thought about where they wanted to go.
Yeah.
On the converse is the end of the show. So the way Bruce ends every show also struck me as a leader. He ends the show by retreating to the back of the stage and standing there and shaking the hand and whispering something in the ear of everybody who was on stage with him that night. And right
Yeah.
now, the E Street Band tours with 19 musicians.
Mhm.
When you hear them talk about it, what they say is, for 20 seconds every night, Bruce Springsteen makes me feel like the most important musician on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing as leaders?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
that's
love it.
something which every time I watch that, I send the same note to my chief of staff, which is help me be this good.
Mhm.
Because he's doing that with people that he has started playing with on this tour, and people like Gary W. Talent that he's been playing with since 1973. But he knows what William James once wrote, which is that the deepest human need is the need to be appreciated.
Mhm.
And, think about that. The deepest human need is the need to be appreciated, bigger than sex, bigger than money, bigger than fame and power. We just want to be appreciated.
Yeah.
He understands his role of doing that as a leader. And that's something which I think every leader can emulate.
So within the book, you make a strong claim that communication is leadership. You've shared a little bit about some of Bruce's one-on-one communication with people and how that makes them feel. But what I'm curious your thoughts behind centering the book on that idea, as opposed to a lot of people would treat communication as like a leadership skill, but you're saying
Yeah,
communication
no, it's certainly
is
something which a lot of leaders look at as, well, what do I do as the CEO? Well, I set the strategy. Well, if I set the strategy and I can't get people bought into it and I can't communicate effectively where we're going and get folks to be behind me, what good is it that I'm setting the strategy? And understanding that communication really lies at the core of all of that. And as with anything, it's a skill that can be honed, and it's a skill that leaders can learn a lot of. But I think it's undervalued by a lot of leaders because they believe that, well, I have positional authority. I'm the CEO, so people are going to listen to me to a point. But not, they might listen to you, but they might not follow you. And really what leadership is all about is one, creating more leaders and
Mm,
creating leadership in
mm,
your organization. But
mhm.
also, how do you kind of transact it, and how do you kind of make people ready to follow you? And that all goes to communication.
Yeah. So what are some examples back to your company? I love the way you put that leadership is about creating more leaders. What are some of the things that you do and that you encourage other leaders to kind of do down the chain?
Well, it's a lot of different things. I'll say that if, I like to think that I'm consistent on this, but I'll say if somebody comes to my office with a question, my first question back to them is, well, what do you recommend? And it's making sure that as leaders, you're not trying to be the answer people,
Right.
but enabling others to find the answers and enabling other folks to kind of get there. It's also understanding, though, that, there are times as leaders that you have to be willing to deliver harder messages,
Mm,
be willing to, sometimes it's telling a client something they might not want to hear.
mhm.
But how do you do that? And how do you keep them in mind as the audience as you're telling them? Because if I tell them, you guys are doing this all wrong, I'm just smarter than you, and you guys are
Right.
stupid. How are you doing this?
Yeah.
Not going to hear that.
Yeah.
But what's the way for me to convey bad news in a way that my audience is willing to hear it and act on it? And some of our clients are some of the biggest companies in the world. So it's very easy for them to fall back on, we're, you're a small consulting firm. We're Microsoft. We're going to do it our way. I've got to really make a compelling case as to why it's a different, why a different way might be the way to go.
Yeah.
That again comes back to communication and how we're talking with them.
Yeah. And then what are some things you've learned about making sure the message you think you're communicating is the message that was received or not received? Like, did they receive
Yeah.
it point earlier or was it received, inaccurately?
Yeah. I love an example that Bruce once gave. And he talks about pop songs, and he writes two kinds of songs. He writes big operatic songs like Jungle Land or Thunder Road. And then times he writes pop songs like Hungry Heart, Waiting on a Sunny Day. And one of the things that Bruce said is, you've written a good pop song when you hear 35,000 people hearing them singing the lyric back to you.
Yeah.
Then you've written a good pop song and that it works. And I'll say, if you hear, and that's something which a lot of leaders can do better. So there are times during the show when Bruce pauses and lets the audience sing it back to him.
Yeah.
He hears the lyrics from them, and he can judge whether they're singing it right, whether they're singing Wait on a Sunny Day or Waiting on Sunday or a Summer's Day.
Yeah.
I get a lot of lyrics wrong from a lot of Taylor Swift songs. My daughter will remind
Yeah.
me, but that's the same thing leaders can do. Every now and then, it's important for a leader to stop communicating outward and start listening. Have people sing it back to you.
Mm,
Ask them. If there's 3 points you always make, make two of them and pause and ask if they can fill in the third. Really getting your audience to participate and getting your audience engaged and giving them the mic from time to time is a key part of leadership, because
mhm.
that's how you check whether or not your messages are being received.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. So Bruce is known for shows that, I mean, they're really long shows, like 3 hours plus.
3 hours. I've been to a 4 hour show. Absolutely.
Yeah, and he's in his early 70s?
He's 76.
76. So, I mean, a lot of energy throughout, even though you said, there's, we know in any concert, there's, big numbers, there's ballads, there's, but, you write about this in the book and talk about pacing.
Yep.
What's the leadership equivalent of pacing and what do we learn from a Bruce Springsteen show?
Well, Tom Peters wrote years ago that leadership is a performance. And I love that, because also Bruce isn't just on stage when he's at the microphone. He's on stage the minute he comes up the stairs from an interview. And that's when everyone in the audience is judging. Geez, I wonder if this is a 76-year-old guy who's gonna, you're gonna come up and kind of hobble up, or is he coming
Yeah.
up with some energy? You're making a judgment without even knowing it from the moment that he appears in your view. Leaders are the same way. And understanding that whether you're on stage or not, and whether you think it or not, your leadership is a performance. If I sit in a meeting and it's not a meeting where I'm presenting and I start looking at my watch, everybody in the room
Yeah.
knows what I'm saying and knows what's happening.
Yeah.
And so does the presenter.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if I got up and said, I don't agree with this. It's like, and at the end, I do agree with what's being said. I've just undercut my own position.
Mhm.
So understanding the idea that as a leader, you are performing no matter what, and that means your body language, your tone.
Mhm.
Um, if I come into the office and the first thing I do is let out a big sigh, I sit down at my desk,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if I say to everybody in the staff meeting, everything's going great. Everyone's wondering, well, wait a minute, if everything's going great, why is he sighing as soon as he comes into the office? What's going on there?
Yeah.
So understanding the complete nature of that performance and understanding you also mentioned energy of that it takes to have a 4-hour show. A lot of leaders forget that when you're presenting, nobody cares about what you're presenting about more than you do. So if my style of presenting is reading my slides like it's business karaoke and I'm a 6 on a 10-point scale of energy,
Yeah.
I can't expect my audience to be any more than a 5.
Yeah.
They're not going to come in over the top of me and be more enthused than I am. So recognize that as a leader, you set that pinnacle of energy in the room
Mhm.
and you need to really kind of do that with some intention. And that's so much of what we talk about in the book is just leadership and communication with intention.
Yeah.
Intention of your energy, intention of what you're saying, understanding and being intentional in your communication.
So when you think of it's powerful to think about, leadership as a performance, that eyes are on you and be aware of that. How do you strike the balance of authenticity with leadership as a performance? Because you don't come across as somebody who's being fake.
No, I mean,
How
one, it's understanding you got to believe and you got to believe in your own way of communicating that. If there are people who are great at standing in front of an audience of 1,000 people and presenting. Steve Jobs was a master. He loved being a showman. There are other folks who would much rather communicate one-on-one. That's fine. So find your lane, be self-aware. And so much of authenticity comes with being aware of yourself, of knowing what your own limitations are. If you're somebody that doesn't draw energy from presenting to 1,000 people, don't do it. Find a way to, record, do a one-on-one meeting, record it and send it out to the 1,000 people. There's plenty of ways that you can address it, but it starts with being true. Authenticity starts with being true to yourself, of understanding what your strengths are, understanding what your weaknesses are, and leaning into them. There's a great story from, years and years ago when Tiger Woods is first breaking onto the PGA Tour. When Woods first broke on the PGA Tour, he led the league and he led the PGA in every single category except for one. You remember what the category was that he was no good at?
I don't.
He was terrible at sand saves.
Okay.
And if you ask most people if they then were doing Tiger Woods' performance review or their self-evaluation going into the performance review cycle, it would say Woods is a very effective golfer. He won the Masters by 16th pro. His driving is exceptional. However, he must work on his sand saves because that's a real weakness of his game. Next year, we're going to set some goals for him on sand saves. That is the opposite of what Tiger's coach told him. Tiger's coach said, let's work on driving accuracy.
Right.
We're already number one on the tour in driving accuracy. Let's just never hit the traps.
I thought that was gonna be the punchline to the story, was that he had so
Yep.
few sands.
Yeah. And that's the goal. And so that's being self-aware.
Yeah.
He knew that like, that's my weakness. This is my strength. I'm going to lean into it.
Yeah.
Authenticity comes from a similar self-awareness with yourself. What's the sand trap for you and how do you stay out of it?
Mhm. Yeah. I wear birds of a feather a little bit. Like, I like Bruce Springsteen. I was a kid when the Born in the USA album was so huge and, iconic music videos. Have not seen him live. I should, at some
You
point.
can, he's scoring now.
I need to do that, make that happen this year. But we're a bird's feather in that I also wrote a LinkedIn post actually just today about a concert I saw on Friday and some takeaways I had. I don't know if you know Brandy Carlisle.
Sure. Go-Go's.
No, well, see, that's a common mistake.
Oh, no.
That's Belinda Carlisle.
Oh, got it. Okay. I'm mixing
Yeah,
up.
it happens. You're not the only one who's made that mistake, especially of our age and knowing the
Yeah.
Go-Go's, of course.
Go-Go's were big in the 80s.
Huge in the '80s, same time as that album from Bruce. But, no relation, last name is spelled differently, but Brandy Carlisle, singer-songwriter from, Seattle originally, country, folk, rock, and this idea of, like, the performance. So, like, I'm a fan of her and her music. She seems like a great person. People seem to love her, the people in the band. really like there's a tight connection. They're not just working together. But there was a moment during a song where I'm not a guitarist, so I won't pretend to know what was happening. But she was looking down at her electric guitar that she had just changed onto in the middle of the song, and she kind of hopped up and down a little bit, which I think was the signal for somebody, a roadie, to come out, and he kind of like look like maybe checked her microphone pack, was looking. I think he reached down and turned up the volume on the guitar. And who knows whose job that was to set the level or if she's supposed to check it. But like, I didn't see anything of like that, diva type performer behavior of like being mad at somebody or blaming somebody. Now, if she was letting that out, I guess that would be part of the leadership performance. So either she wasn't angry at somebody else and she just kind of ran with it and like, oh, okay, I got my volume, I'm good, or she was good at realizing she was on stage as part of her performance. We can't get inside her head, but that stood out to me. Like, at least she didn't react badly.
Yep. Yep. And understood that the person has a job to do and I got to help them do their job. You know, there's another piece to that, which goes to the preparation element of everything, which is somebody was standing there watching and waiting for the signal and, and then knew what to do to address it. I'll say increasing as we become more and more reliant on technology, that's something which is also the leader's job. At some point, we're now 6 years since the pandemic started, and yet we're still on calls where people have the mute button on. And then where they can't find it. At some point we have to say as leaders that, what, if nobody can hear you, they're definitely not listening. So the idea of, hey, I'm going to be on a podcast. Maybe I should have lighting that's right.
Mhm.
Maybe I should have a microphone that works. All of those things are also now they're part of leadership because they're part of
Mhm.
having your message heard. And, I've been on so many webinars and so many meetings where somebody appears to be in the witness protection program because they're backlit and I can't hear them. And if that's the case, that's all I took away from the meeting
Yeah.
was, and frankly, I take away from that also an element of they didn't respect me in the meeting enough to prepare.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, that's not an unfair reaction or conclusion. And I guess that speaks to, I guess, this idea of the performance of being on an online meeting and
Yep,
preparing.
absolutely.
Yeah. As a leader, I'm curious your thoughts, even, back within the company, of kind of thinking through the preparation, like whether it's a concert or a webinar or any sort of event. We plan and we do our best to try to prevent preventable errors, but at the same time realizing something's bound to go wrong that we didn't anticipate or we didn't prevent well enough, whether, it's the guitar issue or something else. What are
Sure.
some lessons you've learned about finding that balance of, yeah, trying to plan for perfection, but not freaking out when something does go wrong?
Yeah, I think there's any number of that. And we do a lot of events all over the world, for our clients. And I'll say over the years, we've had volcanic eruptions that disrupt air travel. We've
Right.
had a pandemic. We've had, just about everything that can happen has happened. And, it really is about, in that case, it's about, forethought and preparation. It's about, well, what are we going to do if? And, years ago, I worked on a presidential campaign doing advance for the candidate. And, we used to do walkthroughs of, well, what happens if something goes wrong here? What if the power goes out?
Mhm.
What if he gets sick and needs to go to go to a hospital or worse? It's asking yourself those questions in advance and making sure you're prepared for them. And then those questions can be, if you're a leader, those questions might be about, the physical setup of the meeting. I always ask things like if I'm presenting and there's, to a large audience and there, I want to make sure there's water on the stage, but then I also get granular of, well, I don't want a pitcher and a glass. I have not successfully poured pitcher into a glass in my adult life. I don't need to do it in front of 1,000 people. And and if it's a bottle, I want the top to be cracked because I don't want to
Mhm.
spend my time on stage trying to crack the bottle.
Right.
So little details like that matter
Yeah.
on the physical, but also on how your message is received. And thinking about, well, if this is what I'm saying, what somebody might say against it, and how might this be misconstrued? and asking yourself
Mm.
that before you deliver the message of, well, what if somebody hears this wrong? What are they hearing then? That can save a lot of messaging in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, so being proactive and thinking about, yeah, what could go wrong and either how do we prevent it or how will we react in the
Yeah,
event somebody does misunderstand, regardless of how many
absolutely.
ways we tried to prevent it.
And leave nothing to chance. I mean, there's an example I use in the book of a company that, years ago, they had made the decision to have their company cafeteria be open until 6 o'clock every night. And the reason they did this is because they were in a part of the city where restaurants closed at 2. Restaurants were open for lunch, and that was about it. They closed at 2, and they knew that a lot of their employees, they were on calls at lunchtime. They couldn't make it, and they had nowhere to eat. So they said, well, what we should do? Why don't we make our company cafeteria open until 6 o'clock every night?
Mhm.
And they did that, and they never really thought about the messaging of it. They just sent an announcement out that the cafeteria is now open until 6. Well, some employees got that message, and what they said was, "Wow, can you believe they want us to start having dinner here now?"
Or,
If they
or we
left it open
we can't stop. Yeah, we can't stop working
because
until 6.
exactly, they want us to sit at our desks until 6 o'clock every night and not have dinner with our families.
Yeah.
This firm isn't family friendly anymore. Maybe
Well,
it's time we go someplace that's family friendly. Before you know it, they had some folks that left the company to go someplace that was more family friendly.
oh
And
my.
that started a little bit of a downward spiral, and the company wound up going down. Now, not only because of that, but that didn't help. And understanding that every message you deliver has to be thought about by the audience. How are they going to perceive it? How might they perceive it wrong? And it's your job to stave off those consequences.
But it sounds like, in a situation like that, there wasn't it sounds like employees just ran with the assumption and
Yep,
grumbled about it and maybe took another job and left instead of I don't blame people for not speaking up. I would say, well, if leaders didn't create an
absolutely.
environment,
No, nobody was listening.
well, but if people are afraid to speak up, they can't be heard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's part of that feel part as well.
Mhm.
People need to understand kind of where this is coming from. They need to feel empowered to speak up. You need to give them the chance to do it. You need to understand how your message was received. There are so many checkpoints that they missed along the way to what became a very preventable and non-intentioned problem.
Yeah. One other thing that's just jumped back to me when you were talking about prepping for different events, whether it's, a presidential campaign or again, the tour. My wife and I were very fortunate to have seats that got us VIP access to the sound check
Mhm.
before the show, which was a great
Yep.
opportunity. And there was a tour back. This actually came up during the backstage tour that happened afterwards. And the woman that was walking us around was pointing up, and this was at the Rosemont Horizon near O'Hare Airport, arena from the 80s. It's a wooden roof, and it's not a particularly high roof. And the woman, and she's part of the tour and part of the operations, was that they bring in their own lighting, and there's this robotic lighting that moves around. And she was like, they test these things. And because that roof was 7 feet lower than most other arenas, they had to make adjustment to the lighting. And I was watching at some point, I'm like, oh, that lighting would have totally come down and hit the drummer.
Mhm.
And thankfully they knew that in advance, and that level of detail and prep and planning
Yep.
avoided a kind of a spinal tap-ish kind of mistake.
Yeah, it's just leaving nothing to chance. And that goes to every element of communication. Just the less you can leave to chance, the better off you are. And just taking that preparation phase so seriously. But again, I'll go back to it's so easy not to. I need to present. I'm clicking PowerPoint, I'm clicking Zoom. And
Mhm.
next thing you know, there we go.
Yeah.
We're there. But in that process, I never thought about what do I want the audience to hear from the PowerPoint. I never thought about that I'm zooming you from a dark room.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's so easy just to click 2 buttons, and next thing you know, I'm communicating,
Yeah.
but I'm missing the chance.
Yeah. Well, I guess today, Andy Freed, the book is Lead Like the Boss, the Bruce Springsteen framework to elevating your leadership. There are a lot of fun stories and connections to make. Encourage people to check the book out. It's available now. There'll be links in the show notes. Just kind of wrap up a little bit here. A little bit more about Bruce and your passion for him and the music. When and where was the first concert where you saw him?
First show I saw was actually not until 2000. I was a little older. 'Cause I didn't have the money to go when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
But in 2000, I caught the last show of the reunion tour at Madison Square Garden, July 1st, 2000. The show that they actually made the DVD of him live at Madison Square Garden that tour on.
Yeah.
Great show, about 3 hours, 45 minutes.
Wow. So you'd been a massive fan for a long time and then finally got to see him live?
Yep. And
Yeah.
lived up to it, and then thought over time as the ability and kids got older and things like that. Said, if
Mhm.
this makes me happy, let's lean into it. And I think that's a good lesson for everybody is find what makes you happy and they'll lean into it because life's too short otherwise.
Yeah. Favorite album of his?
I gotta go with the classic of Born to Run.
Yeah.
Opening with Thunder Road, which is this great invitation, as he says, to a long and earthly journey of the way that the piano starts of kind of that's the invitation to kind of draw you into the album. And just there's not a bad track on the whole album.
Yeah. And then I'm curious your thoughts. Like one thing that gets brought up as a mistake among music fans or even just casual listeners is people misunderstanding and thinking and not realizing that Born in the USA is kind of a protest anthem.
Protest song, absolutely. That's his soldier's story of somebody that comes home from Vietnam and is disenfranchised and can't find a job and what that feels like. It's interesting though, it's the way that music can sound very different. When you hear him play that on Broadway, he plays it and on his Broadway show, he plays it with a 12-string guitar,
Yeah.
and then that has a very different tone to it. And it's very clear that it's a protest song.
Yeah.
The album version is often misconstrued as this great anthem of the United
Mhm.
States. When in many ways it's talking about how we mistreated those veterans.
And, the album cover and the red, white, and blue and the
Yeah,
flag and the all American imagery.
yeah.
I'd be curious. I would love to ask the boss himself if he ever regretted any of those decisions or, he's happy with the art and the different form.
What he's been saying is, look, he loves America and he loves democracy.
Yeah.
But part of that is being willing to stand up and be a critical voice when you need to be,
Yeah.
and force us back to our ideals. And I think that's something which is admirable.
Yes.
And I look at that at a lot of people, a lot of musicians, that you have this great platform and have this great following. I give him a lot of credit for being willing to risk some of his fans to stand up for what he believes is right.
Yeah. And a lot of times leaders have to do that.
That's part of leadership, and that's a great lesson from him.
Yeah. So that's a great lesson to end on, I think, Andy. So congratulations on the launch of the book. And
Thank you.
really appreciate you being here, not only sharing stories and relatable lessons that can come from Bruce, but your experiences as a leader and a CEO. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be here.